Hello, and welcome back to the Live Label Free podcast. Today, we're talking about one of my favorite topics, but not really, and that is FBT, which stands for Family Based Therapy and is also known as the Maudsley Method. This is a widely used treatment approach for eating disorders because it's so called evidence based. But what does that even mean? In this episode, you'll learn why evidence based would better be called evidence biased, and we'll delve into why FBT can actually have the opposite intended effect on neurodivergent individuals. Before diving in, I want to remind you that the doors to the Autistically ED Free Academy are officially open. This is an 8-week group coaching program in which you'll learn how to support yourself or someone you care for through eating disorder recovery in a neurodiversity affirming way. Each week, we'll dive into key topics including sensory sensitivities, demand avoidance, rebuilding trust after trauma, distinguishing autistic traits from ED behaviors, and of course, much more. Along with live group coaching calls with yours truly, each week we'll have dedicated Q&A sessions where you can ask any and all questions you have about neurodiversity and eating disorders. Not only that, but you'll also get 24/7 access to a private community, which is not on Facebook, to ask even more questions and get real-time support from both me and other people who genuinely get what you're going through. The road to recovery doesn't have to be traumatic. It can be empowering, affirming, and aligned with the neurodivergent mind. Enrollment is open for a limited time only, so be sure to get all the details and secure your spot today by visiting the link livelabelfree.com/group. I hope to see you inside the community, and now let's dive into today's episode. So, FBT, an approach that's been praised as the gold standard treatment for eating disorders, while at the same time has been proven to rip relationships apart, destroy trust, and leave trauma in its wake. But before we get into the nitty gritty of why FBT can be so traumatizing, let's make sure we're all on the same page regarding what FBT actually is. Family-based therapy, FBT, was developed in the 1980s by Christopher Dare and his colleagues at the Maudsley Hospital in London, which is why it's sometimes called the Maudsley Method or Maudsley Approach. According to the Treatment Manual for Anorexia Nervosa by James Locke and Daniel Lagrange, who popularized FBT in the US, FBT directs parents to take an active and positive role in an effort to help restore their child's weight, then slowly phase into handing the control back to the child to encourage normal adolescent development. The therapy is structured into 3 phases. Phase 1, weight restoration. In this phase, parents assume responsibility for helping their child eat adequately and restore weight. This phase focuses on physical health and stabilizing eating behaviors under parental supervision. Phase 2, returning control to the adolescent. In this phase, it says, as the child begins to make progress, of course, making a giant assumption here that they even do make progress while literally having zero autonomy or control, the therapy gradually shifts control of eating back to the adolescent. This step supports autonomy while maintaining accountability and safety. And finally, phase 3, establishing a healthy adolescent identity. With eating behavior stabilized, again, totally assuming that they even will stabilize through FBT, the focus moves to supporting normal adolescent development, including building a positive self image and addressing other developmental needs. Well, I don't know about you, but to me, this all just sounds like some sort of magical fairy tale. I mean, even as I was meticulously researching FBT so I could make this podcast and reading about its tenets and how it emerged as an alternative treatment that involved the entire family rather than isolating the patient. I'm like, of course, so many people succumb to what I like to call the FBT trap. I mean, obviously, I'm not a parent, so I will never claim to know what it's like to see your child struggling with this horribly paradoxical mental illness. But I've experienced said illness myself, and I've worked with quite a few parents at this point, and the stories they tell me about how, when it was presented to them, FBT just seemed to be this magical cure being delivered to them on a silver platter. I mean, when you phrase it like the way I phrased it by reading you all about all the tenants, and in theory, it sounds wonderful. I mean, of course you're going to commit to FBT. So then the question is, where does FBT go wrong? And more specifically, why does it go wrong for so many autistic and ADHD folks? Well, first of all, the overarching idea of FBT is that someone with anorexia is incompetent and incapable of making food decisions for themselves. I mean, obviously, duh, that's why they have anorexia, right? I hope you can hear I'm being sarcastic here. So, because the child is incompetent, and I am saying incompetent in air quotes in case you're not watching the video, the parents must temporarily take full control over their child's eating. And when I say full control, I mean hardcore full control. As I describe in my book, Rainbow Girl, a memoir of autism and anorexia, I was just 12 years old when I was sat down with my parents in the little family therapy office in Boston, and we were told that I was going to be discharged from residential treatment, but instead of me getting to make my own food again, which I was so looking forward to, by the way, my parents were going to do all the food preparation for me. I wasn't allowed to come to the grocery store. I wasn't allowed to be in the kitchen. Heck, I wasn't even allowed to choose between a cookie or a granola bar at snack. Everything, and I mean everything, related to food was completely out of my hands. And this is exactly where the first FBT issue arises when it comes to eating disorders and neurodivergence. Autistic people have a heightened need for autonomy, and this goes hand in hand with a heightened need for safety. When you're born into a world in which you feel on a deep soul level that you're different but can't quite pin down why, you grow up feeling this constant sense of threat. And when us humans feel threatened, autistic or not, we're going to find tangible ways to create a sense of safety. Just imagine being dumped into a vast ocean, cold and endless, with no sense of direction or solid ground. Every wave feels like it could pull you under, and there's a gnawing fear that something unknown lurks beneath. In this endless stretch of uncertainty, you see a life raft floating nearby. Naturally, you grab onto it, clinging tightly because it's the only thing that offers even the slightest sense of safety. For autistic people, routines and predictability act as the life raft. They give us something steady to hold on to, something we know we can trust, in a world that often feels like that chaotic ocean. This is also why autistic people do the same things in the same ways at the same times. These rituals are like life rafts that have kept us safe before, so it only makes sense to continue holding on tightly. Obviously, this is also where the eating disorder creeps in. It's another life raft, another thing we can rely on when everything around us seems unreliable. So, going back to FBT, if you try to take control over the only thing your child feels they can control in this uncontrollable world, can you see why that would evoke resistance? And don't even get me started on how demand avoidance plays into all of this, which we will, of course, be talking all about in the Autistically ED Free Academy. So if you are not yet enrolled, you can find all the details at livelabelfree.com/group. In a nutshell, FBT's theft of autonomy can cause neurodivergent individuals to cling even tighter to their eating disorder because, like I said, it's the one thing they feel they can maintain a sense of control over. So while FBT may look great on paper, it doesn't consider how its principles tend to clash with the reality of the neurodivergent experience of eating disorders. On that note, let's move on to another problem with the FBT approach. And that is this idea that weight gain must be prioritized above all else. To paraphrase what Locke and Lagrange say in their book, Help Your Teen Beat an Eating Disorder, which I remember my mom having on her bookshelf, by the way, and I talk about this in my book, Rainbow Girl. They say cognitive impairment due to malnutrition must be addressed first to make other therapeutic interventions effective. And this isn't the first time I've heard this concept, and it's probably not the first time you've heard this concept either. While I was in an eating disorder clinic in the Netherlands, where FBT isn't even really a thing, a psychiatrist literally said to me that none of the therapy would work until I gained weight. Yeah. To be fair, they definitely have a point because malnutrition does negatively impact cognitive function. However, you simply cannot push aside emotional, sensory, and psychological factors that accompany an eating disorder, especially in neurodivergent brains. Prioritizing weight gain above all else can create an oversimplified view of recovery that fails to address the individual's holistic needs. So, even if the initial FBT phase works, and the child, or in some cases adults, as I know FBT is also being applied to adults nowadays, gains weight, they'll likely lose the weight and relapse as soon as they regain some autonomy because the underlying autistic traits that contributed to the eating disorder in the first place weren't addressed. Eating disorders are not about food or weight. They're adaptations, protective mechanisms to cope in a world that feels overwhelming. So, pressuring a neurodivergent individual to gain weight without simultaneously addressing their sensory sensitivities, fostering safety and trust, and respecting their heightened need for autonomy will only further entrench their reliance on disordered behaviors because remember, the eating disorder gives them this sense of safety and autonomy, and they may be even more inclined to cling to the eating disorder when their autonomy is being pulled right from under them in the form of FBT. In fact, when I put out my survey for the Autistically ED Free Academy when I was still creating it, I got so many responses highlighting how treatment, most prominently FBT, caused individuals to lose trust. And I'm going to quote one of the responses here. FBT pushed our daughter further into the ground. It was missing her input. Nobody really listened to my daughter at that time, including me, and everyone forced their ideas and treatment upon her, a trauma for her. Then we tried doing CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, but at this point, my daughter had lost trust and was not feeling safe enough to accept help from a specialist. Sigh. Stories like this make me so sad because it doesn't have to be this way. So many treatment professionals try to brainwash you into believing that this evidence based approach is the best approach for anorexia and other eating disorders, but evidence based would be better called evidence biased. Why? Because the evidence in approaches like FBT is often collected in environments and on populations that don't reflect the reality of neurodivergent individuals. Look, I'm not going to pretend that I'm not biased. Of course, I'm biased. I'm a subjective human. But this also means that the creators of FBT and the people for whom FBT does work are also biased. Just because FBT didn't work for me and my family and every single person I've worked with doesn't mean it won't work for other people and their families. But again, just because it works for them doesn't automatically mean that we have enough evidence to claim that it is the gold standard for everyone. It's like that saying if you meet one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. In other words, every autistic person is different. So one person's experiences or traits may not apply to others. Similarly, the underlying factors for one person's eating disorder will be different than for another, which also means that just because FBT works for one person doesn't mean it will work for another. So if FBT has worked for you, that's great. I'm seriously questioning why you're still watching this, but still, that's great. And for anyone who's listening to this, who's watching this, who's had similar experiences to me and my family and my clients, and FBT hasn't worked, and in fact has only made everything worse, you are not broken and you have done nothing wrong. You did the best you could with the resources and knowledge you had at the time. I believe that true growth happens when we adopt a mindset of lifelong learning so we can continually turn our best into better. If you're ready to embark on an 8-week journey to improve your understanding of the connection between autism and eating disorders, and you want a community of people who truly get you, and you want practical strategies to support either yourself or a loved one through the recovery process in a neurodiversity affirming way, come join us in the Autistically ED Free Academy by enrolling at livelabelfree.com/group. So that's again, livelabelfree.com/group. Enrollment is open for a limited time only, so be sure to secure your spot before doors close. I hope to see you inside the academy, and otherwise, I'll talk to you in the next episode. Bye bye for now.